Have you ever considered how a single choice, a secret kept in the quiet of the night, can ripple through time to shatter the very foundations of a kingdom and the heart of its greatest hero? What is fate if not the consequence of a forgotten promise, a name left unspoken? This is the story of a father who became a legend, and a son who sought that legend only to find him on the battlefield as his executioner. It is a tale etched not in stone, but in the tears of a champion, a tragedy so profound that it silenced armies and has echoed through 1,000 years of history as the saddest story ever told. Stories like this survive because they are remembered, shared, and spoken aloud. So if this tale moves you, carry it forward, like this video, and subscribe so that the voices of Persia's past can continue to be heard in the present. It begins not with the clash of swords, but with the quiet thud of a hero's mace falling to the dust, not in anger, but in pursuit of a fleeting shadow. Rostam, the shield of Iran, the mightiest warrior to ever stride the earth, was in the wilderness, his heart set on the hunt. But the hunter became the seeker, for his legendary steed, Raksh, a horse as famed as the hero himself, vanished, lost, gone as if swallowed by the earth. This was no mere animal. Raksh was Rostam's other half, a companion of 100 battles, a creature of fire and spirit. The hero's search, frantic and wide, led him to the borders of a foreign land, to the kingdom of Samangan. There, his reputation preceded him like a storm front. The king of Samangan, hearing that the great Rostam was at his gates, not as a conqueror, but as a guest in distress, welcomed him with all the honor befitting a living myth. Feasts were held, stories were told, wine flowed to soothe the hero's frustration. The king swore that a horse of Raksh's magnificence could not remain hidden in his lands, and that his finest men would scour every valley and hill until the steed was found. Rostam, weary from his search and placated by the king's hospitality, accepted. He was given the finest chambers in the palace, a space fit for royalty, where he could rest while the kingdom of Samangan turned itself inside out for his lost companion. As the hero slept, the palace was still, the torchlight painting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. But in that stillness, a force more potent than any army was moving. It was the hand of destiny, quiet and unseen, turning the key in a lock that, once opened, could never be shut again. The night was not just a pause in a hero's journey, it was the fertile ground where the seeds of an epic sorrow were about to be sown, watered by a secret that would grow into a tree of death. The hero's sleep was heavy, a consequence of the day's long search and the evening's rich feast. But it was a sleep destined to be broken. The air in his chamber shifted, a subtle change that a warrior's senses, even in slumber, could detect. A faint scent of jasmine and musk, a whisper of silk against stone, a presence. Rostam's eyes opened, not to the familiar darkness of his room, but to the soft glow of a single lamp held by a figure of breathtaking beauty. Before him stood a woman who seemed woven from the moonlight itself, her form as elegant as a cypress, her face a vision that could make a pious man forget his prayers. She was accompanied by a single handmaiden, but her own luminescence outshone the lamp she carried. Rostam, a man accustomed to the harsh realities of war and the rugged landscapes of his homeland, was momentarily stunned into silence. This was not a dream. This was Tamina, the daughter of the king of Samangan, a princess whose beauty was a closely guarded secret of the kingdom, a treasure spoken of only in hushed tones. She had come to him in the dead of night, an act of shocking boldness, driven by a purpose that burned in her dark, intelligent eyes. She spoke, her voice a low melody that resonated with both courage and a deep, unsettling vulnerability. She told him she had heard the stories of his deeds, the tales of his impossible strength, his unwavering courage, the legend of the mighty Rostam that had traveled on the wind to the most secluded corners of the world. She had fallen in love, not with a man she had seen, but with the myth he represented, the epic hero of 100 songs. She had orchestrated the hiding of his horse, Raksh, a confession that was both a startling admission and a clever gambit. It was her doing that brought him here, to this palace, to this very room. She had drawn the mountain to her because she could not go to the mountain. Her desire was singular and profound. She wanted a child from his lineage, a son who would carry his strength, his spirit, his heroic blood. She offered herself to him for one night, in secret, promising that no soul beyond her most trusted servant would ever know. It was a proposition that hung in the air, laden with risk, with honor, and with the shadow of future consequences. Rostam looked at her fierce determination and her radiant beauty, and saw in her a spirit worthy of his own. He was a man of impulse, a creature of immense passions that matched his immense strength. In her, he saw not just a fleeting desire, but a legacy, a son who could be a hero. He agreed. He sent a message to her father, the king, formally asking for his daughter's hand in a secret, swift marriage, as was the custom. The king, overjoyed at the prospect of linking his bloodline to the greatest warrior alive, gave his blessing without hesitation. And so, with the silent heart of the palace, while the kingdom slept, a hero and a princess were joined, their union a secret whispered only to the night. It was a single night of passion, a fleeting moment of connection that would create a life destined to become both a beacon of hope and a vessel of unimaginable tragedy. The dawn that broke over the kingdom of Samangan was not just the beginning of a new day, it was the start of a countdown, a clock set in motion by a clandestine union. The world outside the palace walls was unchanged, but within them the future had been irrevocably altered. Before the sun had fully risen, casting its golden light upon the land, the time for parting had arrived. Rostam was a man of duty, his life bound to the service of Iran and its Shah. He could not linger. His world was one of marching armies and contested borders, not the quiet intimacy of a royal court. The secret marriage had been a whirlwind, a dreamlike interlude, but the reality of his life called to him with the first rays of light. Tamina, her heart a mixture of fulfillment and sorrow, knew this. She had achieved her great desire, but the price was a swift and painful farewell. As they stood together in the soft morning light, Rostam took from his arm a precious onyx armband, an emblem of his strength and identity, a jewel that had witnessed countless battles by his side. He pressed it into her hand, his voice low and serious, laying upon her the terms of their secret pact. This token was to be the silent guardian of their child's identity. If the gods blessed them with a daughter, he instructed, she was to weave the jewel into the girl's hair, a beautiful ornament to mark her noble lineage. But if, he continued, a son was born to them, a boy carrying his blood and his might, then the armband was to be fastened upon the child's own arm, a secret sign of his magnificent heritage, a whisper of the lion's blood that flowed in his veins. He made her swear a solemn oath that the boy's identity would be a secret kept from the world. Rostam's reasoning was born from the harsh realities of his existence. He was a man with powerful enemies, and a son known to be his would be a target from the moment of his birth. Furthermore, he feared the unpredictable and often tyrannical nature of his own king, Shah Qaboos. If the Shah learned that Rostam had a son growing in strength, a potential rival in glory, his jealousy and paranoia could lead him to harm the child. The secret was a shield, a necessary darkness to protect the nascent light of a new life. Tamina, her eyes filled with tears, but her will as strong as steel, accepted the terms. She understood the dangers. She vowed to keep their child's lineage hidden, to raise him in the shadow of a lie in order to protect him from a world that was not ready for him. With the pact sealed, their farewell was brief. Raksh, his magnificent steed was returned to him, his disappearance having served its fateful purpose. Rostam mounted the horse, gave one last look at the princess who now carried his future, and rode away back towards Iran, back to his life of endless battle. He left behind a woman, a secret, and a life growing within her. He rode away from a future he could not comprehend, a future that would one day ride back towards him on a tide of blood and tears, wearing his own token of identity, not as a greeting, but as an accusation. The secret they had forged in the dark would one day be brought into the light, not by words, but by the cruel point of a dagger. The 9 months that followed Rostam's departure were a period of quiet, anxious waiting for Princess Tamina. She carried her secret and her child with a grace that masked the undercurrent of fear and hope that defined her existence. As her body changed, so too did the whispers in the court of Samangan, but she guarded the truth of her son's paternity with a fierce and unwavering resolve. When the time came, a son was born, and it was as if a piece of the sun had fallen to earth. He was a child of astonishing vitality, his limbs perfectly formed, his cry full of a strength that belied his infant state. From the moment he entered the world, it was clear he was no ordinary child. He was his father's son in every conceivable way. Tamina named him Sohrab. The boy grew not in years, but in leaps and bounds. At 1 month, he looked like a child of a year. At 3 years, he was already skilled with games of strength and martial prowess. By the age of 10, there was no man in all of Samangan who could match him in wrestling or feats of might. He possessed an almost supernatural strength, a boundless energy, and a spirit that was as fiery and untamable as his father's. His presence was like a young lion cub growing amongst a flock of sheep, his power and bearing setting him apart from all his peers. He was a living legend in the making, and the people of Samangan looked upon him with awe and a touch of fear. Tamina watched her son's prodigious growth with a heart torn between immense pride and a gnawing terror. Every display of his strength was a reminder of the heroic blood in his veins, but it was also a reminder of the promise she had made. She knew that if the world, and especially King Afrasiab of Tehran, the sworn enemy of Iran, discovered that this boy wonder was the son of Rostam, he would be used as a pawn in their endless wars. She also feared losing him to his father. If Rostam knew he had a son of such promise, he would surely come to claim him, taking him away to the battlefields of Iran, a world from which he might never return. To protect him, to keep him by her side, Tamina wove a careful web of deception. To the world, and even to Sohrab himself in his early years, she claimed his father was a great warrior from Tehran who had perished. She gave him a false lineage to anchor him to her own land, hoping to quell the questions that she knew would eventually come. She showered him with love, with training, with everything a young prince could desire, all in an effort to keep the pull of his true heritage at bay. But a river of fire cannot be contained by a dam of secrets. The blood of Rostam was a powerful call, a destiny that could not be denied by a mother's love or a carefully constructed lie. The more Sohrab grew, the more the truth of his own nature became undeniable, and the more the secret weighed upon his mother's soul. She was raising a giant in a gilded cage, and she knew, with the chilling certainty of a prophetess, that the day would come when the cage would no longer hold him. As Sohrab entered the bloom of his youth, the lie his mother had constructed began to fray at the edges. The boy was not just strong, he possessed a wisdom and an ambition that far surpassed his years. He looked at the world around him, at the warriors of Samangan, and knew in his soul that he was different, that his origins were grander than the story he had been told. The whispers of his own heart grew louder than the reassurances of his mother. One day, his patience exhausted, he approached Tamina, his youthful face set with a determination that mirrored the hero he had never met. He demanded the truth. He was no longer a child to be placated with stories. He was a warrior, and he needed to know the name of the man who had sired him, the source of the incredible power that coursed through his veins. He swore that if she did not tell him, he would end her life and his own, for a life without knowledge of his roots was a life without honor. Tamina, seeing the fire in his eyes, the unmistakable echo of Rostam's own indomitable will, knew that the time for secrets was over. Her carefully built dam had broken. With tears streaming down her face, a mix of pride and terror, she confessed everything. She told him of his father, the legendary Rostam, the shield of Iran, the greatest warrior the world had ever known. She recounted the story of that fateful night, of the hidden horse, of their secret union. As proof, she brought forth the gifts his father had left behind, the precious onyx armband meant to be worn on his arm as a sign of his heritage, and a letter sealed by Rostam himself. Sohrab listened, his heart pounding in his chest, a storm of emotions swirling within him. The revelation was not a surprise, but a confirmation of everything his soul had long suspected. He was the son of a living myth. The knowledge did not just fill him, it ignited him. A colossal ambition, an idea of breathtaking audacity, took root in his mind. He would not simply meet his father, he would forge a new world for him. His plan was as grand as it was naive. He would raise an army from the lands of Turan, march on Iran, and overthrow its unworthy and arrogant king, Shah Qaboos. He would then find his father, Rostam, and place him upon the throne he deserved. Together, father and son, the two mightiest warriors on earth, would unite the warring lands of Iran and Turan. They would conquer the world, bringing an end to the endless cycles of bloodshed and establishing a reign of justice and glory. It was the dream of a youth who had inherited his father's strength, but not his experience of the world's treachery. He saw only the glorious end, not the bloody path required to reach it. Tamina, horrified by the scale of his ambition, pleaded with him to be cautious, but her words were like whispers against a hurricane. Sohrab was aflame with his newfound purpose. He immediately began to gather the greatest warriors of Samangan and Turan to his side, his charisma and incredible prowess drawing soldiers to his banner like moths to a flame. The search for his father had transformed into a quest for global domination, a youthful dream that the dark and cunning powers of the world would soon twist into a nightmare. The news of a new, unstoppable warrior rising in the east spread like wildfire. Sohrab, the boy champion of Samangan, was assembling an army, his stated purpose to find his father and remake the world. This news reached the ears of the most dangerous man in the region, Afrasiab, the cunning and ruthless king of Turan, the eternal enemy of Iran. Where others saw a young warrior on a quest, Afrasiab saw a perfect weapon, a tool of exquisite, tragic potential. He immediately summoned his advisors, his mind, a labyrinth of intrigue, already piecing together a devastating strategy. He knew of the legends surrounding Rostam's might, and he had heard the whispers about this new prodigy, Sohrab. The possibility that they were father and son was a notion too delicious to ignore. Afrasiab decided to support Sohrab's campaign, to give him the men, the resources, and the royal sanction he needed to become a credible threat to Iran. He would fan the flames of the boy's ambition, encouraging his dream of overthrowing Shah Qaboos. But his support was a poisoned chalice. Afrasiab's true plan was a masterpiece of cold, calculating cruelty. He instructed his most trusted generals, Human and Barman, to accompany Sohrab, to guide him and to fight by his side. But he gave them a secret, paramount order. Under no circumstances were they to reveal Rostam's identity to Sohrab. If the two were to meet on the battlefield, the father's identity must be concealed from the son. Afrasiab foresaw two possible outcomes, both of which served his ultimate goal of destroying Iran. In the first scenario, the young, powerful Sohrab, in the heat of battle, might succeed in killing the legendary but aging Rostam. If the son unknowingly slew the father, Iran's greatest protector would be gone, its spirit broken, and the kingdom would lie vulnerable, ready for Afrasiab to conquer. The irony of the tragedy would be a victory in itself. In the second, even more beneficial scenario, Rostam, in defending Iran, might be forced to kill the powerful challenger from Turan. If the father killed the son, Rostam would be shattered by grief, his spirit extinguished forever. A broken Rostam was as good as a dead one. Iran would still lose its champion and the throne would be ripe for the taking. It was a perfect no-lose strategy built on the foundation of a family's hidden truth. Afrasiab was not just waging a war of swords and shields. He was waging a war of psychological devastation. He was orchestrating a tragedy, turning a son's love and a father's duty into the instruments of their mutual destruction. And so, with the blessing and the backing of the king of Turan, Sohrab's army swelled into a formidable force. The young warrior, blind to the treachery that surrounded him, believed he was being supported for his noble cause. He saw the Turanian generals as allies, the army as his instrument of destiny. He was a pawn in a game far darker than he could ever imagine, a lamb being led to a slaughter where he was both the butcher and the sacrifice. He marched towards Iran, a beacon of youthful confidence, at the head of a great army, completely unaware that the true enemy was not in front of him, but standing right beside him, whispering encouragement and hiding the one truth that could save him. The first test of Sohrab's burgeoning army came at the White Fortress, a formidable Iranian stronghold that stood as the first line of defense against invasion from the east. The fortress was commanded by a veteran warrior named Gazdaham, but its true pride was its champion, a fierce warrior named Hajir. When Sohrab's massive army appeared before the walls, casting a long shadow over the plains, a wave of fear washed over the defenders. From the ramparts they watched as a single warrior, a youth of immense stature and confidence, rode forth from the Turanian ranks. It was Sohrab, his heart burning with the desire to prove his worth and to speed the journey to his father. He issued a challenge for single combat, his voice booming across the field, calling for Iran's bravest to face him. Hajir, a man of considerable pride and proven courage, could not refuse such a challenge. He mounted his horse, donned his helmet, and rode out to meet the young upstart, confident that he could dispatch this boy and send a message of Iranian defiance to the invaders. The two warriors charged, their lances aimed, a clash of wood and steel that was over in an instant. Sohrab's strength was simply on another level. He shattered Hajir's lance and, with a powerful move, plucked the Iranian champion from his saddle as if he were a child's doll. He threw Hajir to the ground, disarmed him, and bound his hands. The entire duel had lasted mere moments. The defenders on the walls watched in stunned silence, their champion defeated with contemptuous ease. Sohrab, adhering to a code of honor that seemed innate, spared Hajir's life, sending him back to the Turanian camp as his first prisoner. The capture of their champion sent the White Fortress into turmoil. Their best had been defeated without effort. Who among them could possibly stand against this titan? As despair began to take root, a new champion emerged from an unexpected quarter. Ghorda Farid, the daughter of the fortress commander Gazdaham, was a woman who possessed the heart of a lioness. She had been trained in the arts of war since she could walk, and she could not bear to see her home fall in disgrace. In a moment of defiant courage, she went to the armory and donned a suit of armor, concealing her long hair beneath a heavy helmet. She mounted a warhorse, grabbed a lance, and rode out onto the field, a slender but determined figure against the might of the Turanian army. Sohrab, seeing another challenger emerge, was impressed by their courage but expected another swift victory. He charged, ready to repeat his earlier triumph. But this new warrior was different. Ghorda Farid fought with a cunning and agility that surprised him, parrying his powerful thrusts and launching swift counterattacks. They fought with lances until they shattered, then drew their swords, the clash of steel echoing across the plains. Sohrab's raw power was immense, but Godafarid's skill and speed made her a difficult opponent. A long and grueling duel ensued, far fiercer than the brief encounter with Hajir. The defenders on the walls watched with renewed hope, their hearts soaring with every blow their mysterious champion landed. Godafarid's fight was not just for the fortress, it was a desperate defense of its honor, a refusal to be cowed by overwhelming force. For Sohrab, this was his first taste of true Iranian metal. He had come seeking his father, a warrior of legend, and in this unexpected duel, he was facing a spirit of courage and defiance that was a worthy reflection of that legend. He was fighting an enemy he had come to conquer, but he could not help but feel a growing sense of admiration for their tenacity. The battle raged on, a dance of death between the young giant and the mysterious, agile warrior. Sohrab, fueled by his ambition and immense strength, began to press his advantage. The duel with the mysterious Iranian champion had been long and taxing, a testament to the warrior's surprising skill and resilience. But Sohrab's superior strength and stamina eventually began to turn the tide. With a mighty heave, he finally broke through his opponent's defense, landing a blow that, while not fatal, was powerful enough to dislodge their helmet. The heavy steel helm clattered to the ground, and in that instant, the battle froze. A cascade of long dark hair spilled forth, revealing the face of a beautiful young woman. It was Godafarid. Sohrab reined in his horse, his sword arm dropping to his side, his mind reeling in astonishment and admiration. He had been fighting a woman, a warrior of such courage and skill that she had held him, the son of Rostam, at bay. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him: surprise, respect, and a sudden, disarming attraction to this fierce lioness. He had come to conquer her fortress, but in that moment, she had conquered his warrior's heart. Godafarid, her identity revealed and her strength failing, knew that she could not win through force of arms. Like Rostam in a future, fateful encounter, she turned to her wits. She looked at Sohrab, her expression a mix of defiance and allure, and proposed a truce. She argued that there was no honor in a great army taking a fortress by force after its champion had been revealed to be a woman. The world would mock them. Instead, she offered him a deal. If he would let her return to the fortress, she would persuade her father and the garrison to surrender peacefully the next day. The fortress and all its treasures would be his without further bloodshed. Sohrab, young, inexperienced in the ways of deception, and utterly captivated by her beauty and spirit, agreed. He was smitten, and the idea of winning the fortress through her surrender seemed a more romantic and honorable victory than simply crushing it. He watched as she rode back to the gates, which opened to receive her and then promptly shut and barred behind her. He waited for the promised surrender, his mind filled with thoughts of the warrior princess. But the surrender never came. Godafarid had no intention of giving up. Her duel had been a delaying tactic, a brave sacrifice to buy her people time. As Sohrab waited, the defenders of the White Fortress used the cover of night to execute a desperate escape, evacuating through a secret gate and melting away into the wilderness, taking their commander and all their valuables with them. When dawn came, Sohrab approached the walls, expecting a peaceful handover, only to be greeted by the taunts of the few remaining guards left behind. He realized he had been tricked. He stormed the fortress, finding it empty, a hollow prize. He was filled with a mixture of fury at the deception and a grudging admiration for Godafarid's cleverness. Though he had been made a fool, the encounter left a deep impression on him. It was his first lesson that the Iranian spirit was not just one of brute strength, but of cunning, courage, and an unbreakable will to survive. He had won the battle and taken the fortress, but the moral victory belonged to the warrior maiden who had faced a giant and saved her people not with her sword, but with her mind. The fall of the White Fortress, even an empty one, sent a shockwave of terror through Iran. The news that reached the capital was of an unstoppable young champion from the east, a warrior of seemingly divine strength who had effortlessly defeated their border defenses. Panic gripped the court of Shah Qaboos. The Shah, a man whose arrogance was matched only by his paranoia, knew that his own armies were not enough. There was only one man in the entire kingdom who could stand against such a force. One name that was whispered whenever Iran faced an existential threat: Rostam. A messenger was dispatched with the utmost urgency, sent riding day and night to Zabulistan, the homeland of Rostam, where the hero lived in semi-retirement, away from the intrigues of the court. The message was a desperate plea, a summons from the Shah, begging Rostam to come forth once more and be the shield of his nation. Iran was on its knees, its hopes resting entirely on the shoulders of its greatest and often most reluctant champion. Rostam, a figure who should have been revered as a national treasure, had a complex and often contentious relationship with the throne. While he was fiercely patriotic, his loyalty was to the idea of Iran, not to its flawed and petulant ruler. Shah Qaboos, for his part, viewed Rostam with a toxic mix of dependency and resentment. He needed the hero's superhuman strength to secure his throne, but he despised the fact that Rostam's fame and popularity often eclipsed his own. This toxic dynamic was about to erupt. When the Shah's desperate summons reached Rostam, the hero did not immediately leap onto his horse. He was a man who moved at his own pace, a mountain that could not be hurried. He received the messenger, heard the panicked reports of the new Turanian threat, and then proceeded to host a magnificent feast that lasted for 3 days. To him, this was not negligence, it was a display of his supreme confidence. He was Rostam. No upstart from the east could truly threaten a land that he protected. After the celebrations, he finally set out for the capital, arriving not with the haste of a panicked servant, but with the deliberate pace of a king in his own right. He rode into the court of Shah Qaboos, expecting to be greeted with gratitude and honor. Instead, he was met with a blaze of royal fury. Shah Qaboos, his fear having curdled into rage over the hero's perceived delay, was incandescent. He publicly berated Rostam for his tardiness, accusing him of treason and dereliction of duty while the kingdom teetered on the brink of collapse. In his paranoid fury, the Shah made a fatal miscalculation. He did not just reprimand Rostam, he threatened him. He declared that Rostam, along with the messenger who had been sent to him, should be hanged for their insolence. The court froze in horrified silence. To threaten the man who was their only salvation was an act of political and military suicide, a display of arrogance so profound it bordered on madness. The threat of execution was the spark that ignited the hero's formidable pride. Rostam was not a man to be threatened by anyone, least of all by a king he had personally placed and secured on the throne multiple times. His response was as swift and devastating as a thunderclap. He rose to his full, towering height, his eyes blazing with a contempt that made the Shah shrink on his throne. He unleashed a torrent of scorn upon the king, reminding him of all the times he had saved the kingdom, of the dragons he had slain, the demons he had defeated, the armies he had shattered, all in service of an ungrateful and unworthy monarch. He declared that he was Rostam, a free man, the son of Zal, and he was no slave to be threatened with a noose. With a final, ringing denunciation, he turned his back on the Shah and the entire court. He stormed out of the palace, mounted Raksh, and rode away, leaving the kingdom to its fate. He was done. He would not spill another drop of his blood for a king who repaid his service with threats of death. The court was plunged into absolute despair. Their shield was gone. Their only hope had just been driven away by the very man he was supposed to save. Iran was now truly defenseless, not because of the enemy at the gates, but because of the fool on the throne. The departure of Rostam left a vacuum of terror in the Shah's court. The grandees and nobles who had watched the king's disastrous outburst in stunned silence were now faced with the terrifying reality of their situation. The Turanian army, led by its invincible young champion, was marching deeper into their lands, and the one man who could stop them had just been driven away by their own king's folly. A delegation of the wisest and most respected elders, led by the noble Gudars, immediately sought an audience with the disgraced Shah. They did not come with accusations, but with a desperate, pragmatic plea. They painted a vivid picture of the ruin that awaited them, their cities burned, their families enslaved, their kingdom erased from the earth. They reminded Shah Qaboos that while his anger might be a king's prerogative, the survival of Iran was his sacred duty. They made it clear that without Rostam, there was no Iran. Humbled by their stark words and the reality of his own impending doom, the arrogant Shah finally swallowed his pride. He admitted his error and gave the elders his blessing to go after Rostam and beg him to return. The delegation rode out from the capital, their horses lathered, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the fate of the nation rested on their ability to soothe the wounded pride of a giant. They found Rostam in his camp, his anger still a raging fire. He initially refused to even listen to them. His sense of betrayal was so profound. But the elders were wise. They did not appeal to his loyalty to the king, for they knew that well was poisoned. Instead, they spoke of Iran. They spoke of the people, of the land itself, of the history and the legacy that he, more than any other man, embodied and protected. They reminded him that kings come and go, that their follies are temporary, but the soul of the nation was eternal. His duty was not to the crown, but to the millions of souls who looked to him as their guardian. Gudar spoke with passion, his words a balm on the hero's raw pride. He argued that to abandon Iran now, because of the insult of one foolish king, would be to tarnish his own magnificent legacy. Would the great Rostam, the dragon slayer, the hero of 1,000 tales, be remembered as the man who let his homeland fall because of a wounded ego? The appeal worked. Rostam's deep-seated patriotism, his profound love for the very soil of Iran, began to war with his personal anger. He was a man of immense pride, but his love for his country was even greater. After a long, heavy silence, he relented. He agreed to return, not for the sake of the worthless Shah, but for the sake of Iran. He would fight. He would face this new challenger. But he made it clear that his return was a service to the people, not a submission to the king. The elders returned to the capital with the news, and a wave of relief washed over the terrified city. Their shield was returning. Rostam, his anger banked but not extinguished, prepared himself for battle. His mind focused on the unknown warrior who had brought his nation to the brink. He was about to ride towards a confrontation that would test not just his strength, but the very limits of human sorrow. He was riding to meet his destiny, a destiny he had unknowingly sired in a secret chamber many years before. Before committing the armies to a full-scale battle, Rostam, ever the prudent commander, decided to scout the enemy himself. Disguising himself in the simple garb of a Turanian soldier, he moved under the cover of darkness towards the enemy lines. His goal was to assess the strength, the morale, and the leadership of the invading force. He moved with the silence of a hunting cat, his immense frame belying his ability to blend into the shadows. He reached a high vantage point overlooking the sprawling Turanian encampment, a sea of tents and campfires stretching across the plain. From this perch, he observed the heart of the army, the central pavilion, larger and more ornate than the rest. It was there he saw him for the first time. A young warrior of truly heroic proportions stood directing his commanders. He was a mountain of a youth, his shoulders broad, his posture radiating an innate authority and a confidence that bordered on regal. Rostam watched, a strange and unfamiliar feeling stirring in the pit of his stomach. It was a flicker of something akin to paternal pride, an involuntary admiration for the boy's perfect, powerful form. He saw in the young champion an echo of his own lineage, a reflection of the legendary strength of his father Zal and his grandfather Sam. The feeling was as unsettling as it was unexpected. He, Rostam, was looking at his enemy, yet his heart felt a pull, a whisper of recognition that his mind could not place. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to a warrior's respect for a worthy adversary. He continued his reconnaissance, noting the army's discipline and the clear adoration they held for their young leader. This was no ordinary raiding party. This was a force united by a powerful, charismatic commander. His mission complete, Rostam began his silent retreat back to the Iranian lines. It was during this return that fate, with its cruel sense of irony, staged a prelude to the main tragedy. As Rostam moved through a darkened gorge, he was suddenly ambushed. A warrior leapt from the rocks, and the two giants clashed in the pitch blackness, their fight brutal and desperate. Rostam was shocked by his attacker's strength, a power nearly equal to his own. The fight was a silent, deadly struggle, two shadows wrestling at the edge of oblivion. Just as Rostam gained the upper hand and was about to deliver a killing blow, a familiar voice cried out his name in desperation. It was his own brother, Javara, who had also been out on a scouting mission. In the darkness, they had mistaken each other for the enemy. They embraced, shaken and relieved, laughing at the absurdity of their near-fatal error. But the incident was a dark omen, a foreshadowing of a far more terrible case of mistaken identity that was waiting for Rostam on the battlefield. It was a warning from the heavens, a hint that the lines between friend and foe, between kin and enemy, were about to become, tragically, horribly blurred. Rostam returned to his camp, his mind heavy, not with fear of the coming battle, but with the haunting image of the young champion and the unsettling feeling that he was striding towards a conflict unlike any he had ever known. The weight of an unknown sorrow was settling upon his spirit. The following day, as the armies prepared for the inevitable confrontation, Sohrab was consumed by a single, driving purpose: to identify his father. He believed Rostam must be among the Iranian champions, and he was determined to find him before the battle began. He summoned Hajir, the Iranian warrior he had captured at the White Fortress, and led him to a high ridge overlooking the Iranian camp. From this vantage point, the banners and pavilions of the various Iranian heroes were clearly visible. Sohrab, his heart a mixture of hope and anxiety, began his interrogation. He pointed to a tent draped in the banner of the eagle, asking whose command it represented. Hajir, his loyalty to Iran overriding any fear for his own life, identified the various commanders and nobles of the Iranian army. He named Tus, Godars, and the other Drake paladins of the kingdom. Sohrab listened impatiently, his eyes scanning the sea of tents for a sign for the one banner that would signal the presence of the legend. Finally, his gaze settled on a magnificent pavilion, set apart from the others. In front of it, a massive banner depicted a fearsome dragon. Tethered nearby was a warhorse of such size and power that it could only be Raksh. A warrior of immense, godlike stature stood before the tent, a figure who dwarfed all other men. Sohrab's heart leapt. He turned to Hajir, his voice filled with a hopeful tremor, and asked, "Who is that mountain of a man, the one who stands like a lion before the dragon banner? Surely that must be the great Rostam." In that moment, the fate of two lives and two nations rested on the tongue of a single captive. Hajir looked at the boy, saw the burning hope in his eyes, and a terrible fear gripped him. He reasoned with the desperate logic of a patriot. If he confirmed that this was Rostam, one of two disastrous things would happen. Either the boy, in his youthful ambition, would charge in recklessly and be killed by his own father, robbing Turan of its champion but staining Rostam with a terrible sin. Or even worse, if Sohrab truly was Rostam's son, they might reconcile on the spot and the combined might of father and son would be an unstoppable force that could crush not only Turan, but perhaps even the unpopular Shah Qaboos himself. To protect his country from all possibilities, Hajir made a fateful choice. He chose to lie. He looked Sohrab in the eye and said, "That is not Rostam. The great hero has not yet arrived from his homeland. That is merely one of the Shah's appointed generals from China." The lie was a dagger to Sohrab's hopes. A wave of disappointment and frustration washed over him. His father was not here. The man he had to fight, the champion of this army, was just another obstacle on his path. The deception was complete. Fate had conspired, using the loyalty of a well-meaning soldier and the secrecy of a Turanian king to keep father and son in ignorance. The path was now clear for their tragic meeting. Disheartened but resolute, Sohrab rode down from the ridge, his mind set on battle. He would issue a challenge, and he would crush whoever the Iranians sent against him, hoping that the news of his victories would finally draw the real Rostam out of hiding. He had no idea that the man he was about to call out, the man who would ride to meet him, was the very person he was seeking. The veil of ignorance, woven by so many different hands, was now drawn tight, and the stage was set for the cruelest duel in all of Persian history. With his hope of identifying his father dashed, Sohrab's frustration hardened into a warrior's resolve. He would force the issue. He rode to the center of the plain that separated the two armies, a solitary, imposing figure, and issued a thunderous challenge. He called for the greatest of the Iranian champions to face him in single combat, demanding that they send their best, their ultimate warrior, to settle the fate of the coming war. In the Iranian camp, the challenge was met with a chilling silence. The warriors had all seen the boy's immense size and had heard the tales of his victories. None among them felt they were his equal. One by one, the great paladins of Iran, men of proven courage, declined the challenge, admitting that to face such a foe would be suicide. All eyes turned to Rostam. The hero had been observing the young challenger, the same strange mix of admiration and disquiet stirring within him. He saw the boy's impatience, his raw power, and felt a pang of something he mistook for pity. It seemed a waste for such a magnificent young warrior to die so young, yet duty was duty. With all others refusing, the burden fell, as it always did, to him. Rostam prepared for combat, but he did so following his long-standing custom. He would fight anonymously. He believed his name alone could intimidate a foe, and he sought a pure contest of strength, not one of reputation. He donned a simple unmarked suit of armor and a helmet that concealed his famous features, becoming not Rostam, the legend, but simply the champion of Iran. He rode out onto the field, his colossal frame mounted on the equally colossal Raksh. The two warriors approached each other, the earth seeming to tremble beneath them. They were a mirror image of power, one in the full bloom of his youth, the other at the zenith of his legendary strength. As they met in the center of the plain, Rostam spoke first. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of 100 battles. He looked at the young warrior before him, and that inexplicable paternal feeling rose in him again. He offered Sohrab a way out. He praised the boy's courage and strength, suggesting he was too fine a warrior to die in service of the treacherous Afrasiab. He invited Sohrab to abandon the Turanian cause and join him to fight for Iran, where his talents would be honored. Sohrab listened, impressed by the champion's magnanimous tone and his incredible presence. The sheer power radiating from this man was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The hope that had been crushed by Hajir's lie flared once more. He looked at the Iranian champion and asked the question that burned in his soul, the question upon which his entire world turned. "I have a sense that you are the man I seek. I have heard the descriptions of the great hero of Iran. Tell me, are you Rostam?" It was the moment of truth, the final chance for fate to be averted. The air crackled with unspoken possibility. Father and son stood face to face, separated only by a helmet and a lie. Rostam, however, was bound by his own warrior's code and his pride. He could not be seen to be proclaiming his own legend on the battlefield. To do so would be an act of unforgivable arrogance. He also suspected a trick. Perhaps this youth was trying to learn his identity to gain some advantage. Firm in his principles, he looked back at the boy and sealed their doom with a single, devastating denial. "I am not he," Rostam said, his voice flat and final. "You will not face Rostam today. You will face me." The lie, spoken from a place of honor and caution, was the cruelest blow of all. It extinguished the final flicker of hope in Sohrab's heart and replaced it with a cold, hard resolve. His father was not here. This mighty warrior was just another enemy, and so, with all paths to recognition now closed, there was nothing left but to fight. The duel of father and son was about to begin, a battle born from a secret, fueled by lies, and destined to end in a revelation of unbearable sorrow. The signal for combat was given, and the two titans charged. It was a collision that shook the heavens. Their lances, massive beams of wood tipped with sharpened steel, struck each other's shields with the force of a lightning strike, shattering into 1,000 splinters. They drew their heavy swords, and the air rang with a brutal chorus of steel on steel. Each blow was delivered with such force that it would have felled a lesser man, but here the two were perfectly matched. Sohrab's youthful speed and relentless aggression were countered by Rostam's immense power and centuries of battle experience. They fought until their swords were notched and their arms grew heavy, yet neither could gain the upper hand. The ground around them was torn and scarred from the fury of their combat. Abandoning their broken swords, they dismounted and began to wrestle, a primal contest of pure strength. It was here that their shared bloodline was most apparent. They moved with the same instincts, the same explosive power. The armies on both sides watched in silent, breathless awe. They had never witnessed a duel of such magnitude. These were not men. They were demigods, forces of nature locked in a struggle for dominance. They grappled for hours under the hot sun, their bodies slick with sweat and grime, their muscles straining to the point of breaking. Rostam, for the first time in his long and storied life, felt his own legendary strength being matched and at times surpassed. The boy was a whirlwind, a force of raw, untamed power that seemed limitless. As evening approached, they finally broke apart, utterly exhausted, their bodies bruised and battered. They had fought to a perfect stalemate. They agreed, with a shared, grudging respect, to cease combat for the day and resume their epic struggle on the morrow. As Rostam returned to the Iranian camp, a deep sense of unease settled over him. The physical exhaustion was familiar, but the feeling in his soul was not. He confided in his brother Javara, his voice heavy with a new and troubling humility. He confessed that he had never, in all his years of fighting demons, dragons, and entire armies, faced a warrior of such power. He felt as if his own time might be at an end, that this young lion from the east might be the one destined to finally defeat him. That night, Rostam prayed. He prayed to the Creator for the strength to defend his homeland, for the power to overcome this incredible adversary. He prayed with all the fervor of a man who felt the shadow of his own mortality for the first time. He was praying for the strength to kill his own son. In the Turanian camp, Sohrab was also filled with a sense of wonder and disbelief. He recounted the day's battle to his mentors, Human and Barman, the treacherous generals of Afraziab. He described the Iranian champion's godlike strength, his cunning, the sheer immovable force of his presence. The suspicion that had been planted in his mind earlier returned with overwhelming force. "This man fights like Rostam," he declared. "He moves like him. He has the strength of a legend. I cannot believe it is not him." But the generals, bound by their king's cruel orders, quickly and skillfully dismissed his concerns. They reassured him that Rostam was known to be far older, that this was simply a great champion, but not the one he sought. They praised Sohrab's own strength, telling him that he had shaken the confidence of Iran's best and that tomorrow victory would surely be his. Their words, like poison mixed with honey, soothed his suspicions and stoked the fires of his ambition. And so, on both sides of the field, father and son prepared for a second day of battle, each unaware of the other's identity, both surrounded by a conspiracy of silence and lies, both marching inexorably towards a tragedy that would leave the world in mourning. The second day of the duel began with an intensity that surpassed the first. There were no more probing attacks, no testing of strength. Both warriors knew their opponent's measure, and they met with the full explosive fury of their power. The clash of their maces sent sparks flying, the blows so powerful they dented and warped the heavy steel. They fought on horseback until their mounts, exhausted and battered, could no longer stand. Then they continued on foot, their swords a blur of motion, their battle cries echoing across the plain. For hours, the struggle was a near-perfect deadlock, a testament to their mirrored strength. But slowly, imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. Sohrab's youth, his boundless stamina, began to wear down the older champion. Rostam, for all his legendary power, was still a mortal man, and the relentless, ferocious assault of his younger opponent began to take its toll. In a sudden, explosive movement, Sohrab saw an opening. He lunged forward, not with his sword, but with his body. He grappled with Rostam, and using his incredible strength and leverage, he lifted the giant off his feet and threw him to the ground with a resounding crash. The legendary Rostam, the unconquerable shield of Iran, was down. The Iranian army let out a collective gasp of horror. Sohrab stood over him, his sword raised, victory in his grasp. He had done the impossible. He had defeated the champion of Iran. As he prepared to deliver the final killing blow, Rostam, his mind racing even in defeat, resorted to the one weapon he had left, his wits. Lying on his back, with the point of a sword at his throat, he spoke, his voice calm and authoritative despite his position. He told Sohrab, "Young warrior, you are not familiar with the noble customs of war in my country. Here, it is the law of chivalry that a great champion is only truly defeated and can only be slain after he has been thrown to the ground for a second time. To kill me now after the first fall would be an act without honor." Sohrab, young and idealistic, was a man who craved honor above all else. He was fighting not just for victory, but to prove himself worthy of his legendary father. The idea of winning in a dishonorable fashion was abhorrent to him. He looked down at the defeated champion, a man for whom he felt a profound and inexplicable respect, and he believed the lie. He lowered his sword, allowing Rostam to rise. He had won the fight, but he would grant his opponent the chance to be defeated with honor on the following day. He had thrown away his victory out of a sense of chivalry, a noble gesture that would cost him his life. Rostam, shaken and humbled, retreated from the field, his body aching, but his life spared by a trick. He knew he had only delayed the inevitable. The boy was stronger. Tomorrow there would be no escape. The reprieve granted by his own cunning trick was a double-edged sword for Rostam. He had survived the day, but he knew he had been physically bested. The young challenger was his superior in strength and stamina. To face him again on the morrow in his current state would be to face certain death. Humbled and desperate in a way he had never been before, Rostam walked away from the camp, seeking solitude by a remote stream. There, under the vast, uncaring sky, the greatest warrior on earth fell to his knees. He prayed. It was not a prayer of thanks or of formal reverence. It was the raw, desperate plea of a man pushed to his absolute limit. He prayed to the Creator, the ultimate source of all power, and begged for a miracle. He asked for the return of his full primeval strength, the legendary God-given might of his youth, the power that had allowed him to perform impossible labors, to uproot trees, to divert rivers. He pleaded that this strength, which had been tempered by age, be granted to him one last time, so that he could save his people and his homeland from the destruction that awaited them. As he prayed, a change came over him. A divine energy surged through his veins, a warmth that spread through his weary limbs, dispelling the aches and the exhaustion. He felt his muscles swell with a power he had not felt in years. He rose to his feet, no longer a tired veteran, but a force of nature reborn. He was Rostam in his ultimate form, his body infused with a terrible, divine might. He had been granted his wish. The heavens had answered his prayer, giving him the power to defeat his undefeatable foe. The tragedy was now set in stone, for he had just been given the strength to commit the most unforgivable of acts. The third day dawned, and the two warriors met on the field for the final time. The atmosphere was different. The air was thick with the sense of dread of an impending, irreversible doom. Sohrab, as he rode to the center of the plain, felt a sudden, chilling premonition. He looked at the Iranian champion and saw something new, something terrifying. The man before him seemed larger, his presence more immense, as if he were radiating a dark, powerful energy. Sohrab's youthful confidence was replaced by a strange melancholy. He made one last attempt at peace, his voice tinged with a sadness he couldn't explain. He spoke of the futility of their conflict, of the admiration he felt for his opponent, and suggested they end the duel and part as friends. But Rostam, now filled with a cold, divine purpose and the memory of his near-fatal humiliation the day before, was in no mood for reconciliation. He rebuffed the offer curtly, his mind set only on the grim task ahead. There would be no more words. The final clash was terrifyingly brief. It was not a duel, it was an execution. Infused with his renewed supernatural might, Rostam was no longer just a warrior. He was an avalanche, an earthquake. He charged, and his impact was absolute. He seized Sohrab, a feat that had been impossible the day before, and with a terrible, world-shaking roar, he lifted the young giant into the air. He held his son aloft for a moment, a sacrifice to the cruel gods of war, and then slammed him to the ground with a force that cracked the very earth beneath them. Before Sohrab, stunned and broken by the fall, could even register what had happened, Rostam drew his dagger. Without a moment's hesitation, driven by the cold fury of battle and the divine power that coursed through him, he plunged the blade deep into the young warrior's chest. The blow was mortal. A gasp of shocked silence fell over both armies as they watched their invincible young champion fall. Sohrab lay on the blood-soaked ground, the life draining from him, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He looked up at the towering figure who stood over him, the man who had defeated him, and with a weak, gasping voice, he spoke the words that would shatter the world. He did not curse his killer. Instead, he issued a prophecy, a promise of vengeance from beyond the grave. "What you have done," he whispered, "you have done to yourself. The world will not celebrate you for this victory. For even if you were a fish in the sea or a star in the heavens, you will not escape the wrath of my father. My father, the great Rostam, will hear of this, and he will hunt you to the ends of the earth to avenge the death of his son." The words struck Rostam with the force of a physical blow. The divine strength drained from him, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that turned his blood to ice. He stared down at the dying boy, his mind refusing to process the implication. He croaked, his voice a dry rasp, demanding proof of this impossible claim. What sign did he possess that he was the son of Rostam? Sohrab, with the last of his fading strength, gave the final, heartbreaking command. "Unclasp the armor on my arm," he gasped, "and you will see the token my mother gave me, the sign of my father." With trembling, horrified hands, Rostam reached down and unfastened the plate of armor on the boy's upper arm, and there, revealed against the pale skin, was the onyx armband. The same jewel he had given to Princess Tamina in a secret chamber in Samangan what seemed like a lifetime ago. The proof was absolute, undeniable, and utterly devastating. The truth, so long concealed by so many, was finally revealed, not in a joyful reunion, but in the tragic aftermath of a fatal wound delivered by a father's own hand. The world stopped. For Rostam, the sun fell from the sky, the mountains crumbled to dust, and the universe collapsed into a single point of unbearable agony. The realization of what he had done did not dawn on him. It exploded within him, a supernova of grief that annihilated his very soul. He let out a cry, a sound so inhuman, so filled with a pain beyond the comprehension of mortal men that it silenced the entire battlefield. It was the sound of a hero's spirit breaking, the roar of a father who had just murdered his own legacy. The armies of Iran and Turan, enemies moments before, stood frozen, united in their horror at the scene unfolding before them. Rostam collapsed to the ground, tearing at his hair, rubbing dust and blood on his face, a giant of a man reduced to a sobbing, wretched creature. He cradled the head of his dying son, his tears mingling with the blood that poured from the wound he had inflicted. In his madness and grief, he reached for his own dagger, intending to plunge it into his own heart, to follow the son he had just met into the darkness. But his commanders, rushing to his side, wrestled the weapon from his grasp, pleading with him to live, to not compound the tragedy. A desperate, fleeting hope ignited in Rostam's mind. He remembered the legends of a magical healing potion, a panacea known as the Nush Daru, which was in the possession of the Shah Kavus. It was said to be able to heal any wound, even one as fatal as this. He immediately dispatched a messenger to the capital, begging the Shah to send the potion with all possible speed to save the life of his newfound son. But Shah Kavus, in his petty, vindictive heart, saw this tragedy not as a cause for compassion, but as a stroke of good fortune. He had long feared Rostam's power, and the idea of a united Rostam and his equally mighty son was a threat he could not tolerate. A living Sohrab could one day challenge his throne, and so, with a cold and cruel calculation, he delayed. He made excuses, dawdled, and ensured the potion would not be sent in time. While the messenger raced on a futile mission, Sohrab lay dying in his father's arms. He looked up at the weeping giant, his own pain eclipsed by a sense of peace. He spoke words of comfort to his father, telling him not to grieve, that this was the path ordained by the heavens. He had sought his father with a sword, and he had found him. His quest, in its own tragic way, was complete. He died. His last breath, a soft sigh on the wind, leaving his father to drown in an ocean of silent, unending grief. The news of Sohrab's death and the Shah's cruel refusal to help reached the messenger on the road. The mission was abandoned. The Turanian army, learning that the boy they had followed was the son of the man who had killed him, retreated in sorrow and disbelief, their campaign of invasion forgotten. The Iranians had won the war, but it was a victory that felt like a funeral. Rostam, his heart a hollowed-out ruin, tenderly prepared his son's body for burial. He built a great bier and, in a procession of profound sorrow, carried his son back to his homeland of Zabulistan. He had ridden out to the battlefield as Iran's greatest champion, its shield and its hope. He returned a broken man, the killer of his own son, his greatest victory forever transformed into his most absolute and soul-crushing defeat. His life would continue, but the light within him was extinguished forever, a living monument to a tragedy born of a secret, a lie, and the cruel, inescapable hand of fate.